Okay, I'm going to do this quick screencast just to give you an idea as far as what I'm looking for when you're doing a slideshow, as well as to provide some examples as far as tips to improve, after your first presentation is completed. So looking at this particular slideshow here, I'm going to go to, what is it, slide sorter. I have 140, 50 something slides here, which sounds like a lot. You probably wouldn't want to be up there, saying something for, 100 minutes or something like that. But I kind of go through these slides at a fast pace. And I'll give you an example. So the Roaring Twenties was about change. That's the point that I am trying to make. Like, that's the whole point of this PowerPoint. So notice here it says presentation lacks a clear central focus or main point like a thesis. So that's my thesis, that the Roaring Twenties was about change. So that 150 slides, everything that I'm using is going to be designed to support that particular point. I've also come up with this example here, which is about some of the changes. Like the 20s is all about change. So if this represents life before the 20s, this represents life during the 20s, and each piece of dirt that you place into this glass of water is what's going to contaminate it. And that is kind of the point there. So whether we're talking about women, business, homosexuality, technology, all of those little pieces of dirt can get placed into this glass of water, which is going to make it look like this one here. So when there's uncertainty ahead, people usually reject. And going back to the concept once again about the dirty water, there have been numerous examples of people throughout history and nations that have been trying to reject change because at the end of the day, I would argue people probably want to drink this as opposed to drink that. So the Roaring Twenties was about change, business, African American, women, immigrants, living conditions, entertainment. All of these things are issues that are going to change during the 20s. So if I wanted to start with a quick background on labor, keep in mind, labor is going to be something there that could impact, living conditions, immigration, and so many other items. So we have more people that are working in factories, and this is definitely going to be problematic, as you can see all of the people here that are working in this factory. And I would say living conditions could be another thing where, if people are working primarily in cities, that is going to impact, where people live, and it's going to make things congested. So just to give you an idea about this, let's go look at African Americans. So African Americans, this particular map here, and notice, I've used the map, and it's okay for you to say, in this map, we're looking at the arrows, which represents the black population leaving the South and going to bigger cities, Philadelphia, New York. So that could kind of reinforce the point that I was making here about, people going into these factories and securing some of those particular jobs. It's okay for you to use maps. It's okay for you to highlight. You should be highlighting areas and explain certain things. Tell your audience, I've selected this map, and just explain the reasons as far as why you selected the map. Notice what I did here. I've gathered some data, and 6 million African Americans are going to leave during the Great Migration. And, there's going to be a huge percentage of those individuals going to Harlem, which is going to alter, life in that particular place, as well as in Chicago. In this particular image, we see an example of a drawing, which is part of the Harlem Renaissance, that is trying to depict life in Harlem for African American Americans. Notice how I'm also able to go into this particular area as far as this, slideshow, and just kind of, zoom in on certain areas. Like, that's what I'm doing. I don't know if you noticed, but there is some audio that's there. Let's take a listen. That audio is just, some of the jazz, some of the music that possibly would be, playing in the background. So when I switch to this slide, that automatically plays. I go to this one, I will just ignore him. Notice, let's wait for the music to stop. All right, let's go back to this one here. When we're looking at this particular image, you can highlight certain areas. Maybe you want to focus on the fact that these two women are here They don't seem to be married. Remember, the 20s is about change, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. That these women's maybe they're smoking, maybe their dress is different, and so this is another example of the 20s being about change. Notice how we're talking about Harlem, we're talking about the African American population, but we also could start talking about women. And notice again how I highlighted. I just figured out what happened there. I created this PowerPoint a while ago on a different version of Word, and then it actually has picked up the audio that I placed there. So I wasn't quite ready for that. 20 is about change, where people are style is starting to change, different kind of music. People are bringing in new dances. And as I said before, if we go back to the Harlem Renaissance, the African American population is going to bring aspects of their cultural identity, which kind of fits the theme that I'm trying to get you to think about with regard to the, glasses of water or the glass of water. Let's see what other changes that I have here. Lindy Hop could be another thing that you add. It's a dance. If we click this link here, which would be totally allowed, you click the link, and maybe you allow your viewer to kind of see something that's historic. The Great Migration. Notice here how I put the woman screaming. This woman screaming is a result of too much changes, that are happening. When this African American population moves in, they're going to bring their food, speech patterns, their dance style of music, their language, all of that stuff is going to come along with them. What about women? As I said before, this is about women, changing as well. Notice how I put the graphic, and mainly what I wanted to do here is just count. I like how this PowerPoint is actually starting to work. It's actually the first time in 2 years that I've seen this. So what I did here is I just counted the amount of women. Like, why would you include a picture and not explain anything that is going on? It's okay. Maybe you want to zoom in on this particular woman for some reason. Maybe you want to count all of the women here. Notice how I also put in some language here from text, like totally allowed stuff. So again, let's kind of get back into character. So if the 20s is about change, now I'm talking about women. So during the 1920s, women are working more, and we can see in this particular image here, women are working in factories in greater numbers. Women were also called flappers, as we could see with this particular line here. Flappers was a way to describe the female of the 1920s if she was young, and if she was dressing a certain way. Notice how the skirts are starting to hike up, which is another example of the 20s about change. Here we're talking about women changing the way they dress, the way they behave. And that right there is another example of the 20s using women and what their experience was like, during the 1920s, where they're cutting their hair and maybe they're, dressing differently, which kind of goes back to the next point here, where we see once again, the 20s about change, and it's about whether or not women are going to change the way they dress. And notice how I highlighted on this particular individual, which is another example of looking at women differently, where they're saying, okay, the women, if they're going to dress a certain way and they're showing too much skin, it is another example of declining, American values. We expect women to be a certain way, and they're starting to change. Keep in mind, that's the thesis here, that the 20s was simply about change. We could talk about other women's, the vamp, which I think would be considered the Kim Kardashian of the 1920s, Clara Bow, some of the other women. Notice here how the flappers, they're not getting married, and they're really starting to change, the sexualization of women, just, by their style of dress and things like that. Let's go back to the rubric here. So like I said, I wasn't planning on the this new version of PowerPoint actually picking up the animation. But when you're doing the slideshow, organization, student demonstrates some form of sequence or something strays or sometimes strays off topic. Like, you want to stay on task. You want to stay, focused. This is directly linked to this one right here. Like, my central thesis was simply that the 20s was about change. And if I went through that PowerPoint, I'd give you examples of movies, of immigrants. I'd give you a bunch of examples. It would be okay for you to kind of repeat that particular point. The 20s is about change. Let's see, what else do I have here? Notes and memorization. You want to have this stuff memorized. Use the images to trigger, what you're saying. If we go back to that slide with the 61 with the women, I totally forgot that that was in there, but I knew, like, when that animation started, it triggered. I was like, okay, this is about the amount of women. Like, that's why I picked that particular image. Let's see, what else? Let's take a look here. You will earn a lower grade if you use slides with text. Try to use images that help to tell the story or message you are trying to get across to the viewer. Think of each slide like a piece of the overall story you are telling. So my story, once again, is about the 20s being about change, and I've just given you a bunch of examples. You want to use a bunch of images to kind of make your point. So let's see how that would play out. Let's take a look at this one here. I'll just go real quick on this one. I can tell already. So now I'm going to transition to the next topic is about immigration. Okay, so for immigration, in this particular image, this is about the motivation of why people would come to the United States during the 1920s, which is considered one of the highest years for immigration to the United States. As we could see, 18 million people are coming from this particular part of Europe, and people from Asia coming in this particular numbers. Now, I've highlighted Angel Island because Angel Island is the processing center for immigrants coming from the West Coast, and Ellis Island would be the East Coast. Looking at this particular slide here, where I went into the census data, looking at the year 1920, I just tracked North America, and we can look at all of the areas to get a grand total of the amount of immigrants that are coming to the United States. There you go. And notice how Europe seems to be the biggest number, that being the total. So that right there says a lot about immigration. And as people move into certain areas, those areas are going to change, which is precisely the point about immigration being another example of the 20s being about change. In this particular image, which is of Chicago, you can see German, Irish, Polish people in this particular map of Chicago, as I've said. And it's just trying to show where those particular immigrant groups are moving. Just like the African American group moving to Harlem, same outcome. These Germans, these Irish people, these Polish people are going to bring their culture, their style of dress, and so on, which is going to change this particular area. Here we see another image. This is an image from a book on the New Deal that looks at the South Side of Chicago and how Chicago was actually segregated based on immigration, European immigrants, the African American population, and I want to say that there is a Mexican group here. I do remember that in the book, however, I don't necessarily know if it's in this image. Czech and Polish people are going to that particular area there. So when we take the Great Migration, when we take the European migration of immigrants, we wind up adding those two numbers, and all of these individuals go to Angel Island or Ellis Island, and the end result is that the American population is going to increase. If you're wondering why I included that particular image there, it's looking at South Brunswick as an example of cultural change. What happened to South Brunswick when you see a huge population from India come in to the town? You're going to see people, dealing with their, traditional style of dress and being confronted with whether or not they're going to change, that particular, way of life from wherever they are migrating from. And so if you were, unsure of how people felt, and this is going back to 2011, people had some similar attitudes to, immigrant groups going in the 1920s, where they felt that too many people coming over from parts of different parts of the world, that they were going to alter South Brunswick. And this is actually a response to South Brunswick being one of the first school districts to give off for Diwali, which is, what they're arguing about in this particular piece. Anyway, that's it. So just notice how I kind of went fast and I have a central focus, and that was kind of the approach that I use. It's okay for you to use a political cartoon and just highlight that. Like, notice what I did. I have this one here, and then I'm kind of just highlighting a certain area. And if you wanted to, go further, maybe the next slide, you just zoom in on this area. Do that stuff. Do whatever you have to do. Use more slides to support the point you're trying to make. That's it.